All right, we are live. Good afternoon. We're going to get started here. Thank you all for attending today. We're excited to be with you today and discuss how your bank can build a better security culture and really the very important role that leadership plays in building this culture across the bank. Just a few housekeeping items here before we get started. We will be recording this webinar, and we'll also be sending out the recording after the presentation. We also love questions here at Xamin, so feel free to put them in the Q&A in the chat, and then we'll address those at the end of the presentation. And then lastly, there's going to be a short survey sent, in which we'd appreciate your feedback. So a quick introduction on who you're hearing today and also at Xamin. My name is Anthony Garofalo. I'm the Director of Business Development here at Xamin, and I'm joined by my colleague, Jeremy Bumruck, who's our Director of Professional Services and Compliance. And for those of you on today that may not be familiar with Xamin, we've been helping community banks navigate security, compliance, and IT oversight since 1999. And we really pride ourselves as a boutique managed services and advisory firm that understands the importance of security, regulatory requirements, and really ultimately the technical challenges that a bank faces on a day-to-day basis. And in working with hundreds of banks across the country of all shapes and sizes, one of the consistent problems that we see is kind of this unalignment of technology and business strategy, right? So, how does the bank achieve its short and long-term business goals while staying secure, staying proactive, and continuing to reduce risk? And if you were to interview any of our clients today, I think most would say that this is a really big area of differentiation within Xamin. We not only keep our clients secure and compliant, but help provide a strategy for today and in the future. So we'll dive right into it. Quick agenda for today's presentation. What we want to do is first kind of address the past and present when it comes to security oversight. We're going to discuss some common board questions that you may be hearing at the bank, as well as what the board should be asking. We're going to talk about how to build an executive governance model there, and then end with a quick case study and some questions. So as we kind of dive into the material here, a question I always like to pose is, where would you rank your bank's security culture on a scale of 1 to 10? You don't have to answer in the chat, and you can keep it to yourself. But I think an honest assessment of this is really necessary in order to help foster internal conversation and really build an appropriate strategy that's right for your bank. So throughout the presentation, kind of think about this question and really answer it honestly there internally. So let's talk about kind of the shift on responsibility and the shift around security. You may be experiencing this shift in your own bank today, but not so long ago, most of the security and IT accountability belonged really in the IT world. Not only were IT teams charged of managing day-to-day operations and incidents and data security and troubleshooting, but any issues that could come up from a regulatory standpoint or cyber event could pretty easily be placed in the hands of the IT team. And, way back when, and it was pretty much easier for an executive person to say to the IT team, hey, you didn't have the right things in place, or you're not doing enough to keep us secure. Also, this siloing of IT accountability, it really aided in the separation of technology strategy aligning with business strategy of the bank, as well as could lead to a potential archaeological dig, for information if the IT manager ever left the bank. So not sure if your bank had ever experienced that, but certainly things that we've seen along the way. And, really when you fast forward today, the accountability has shifted drastically to the C-suite and to the board. And it really seems like, every other week there's some sort of headline that you've probably seen on LinkedIn maybe, or on the news regarding a breach, and really even the executives involved. And more and more, more and more of these executives are becoming personally liable for these attacks. So cybersecurity, it's really no longer a backroom IT concern, but should be a focal agenda item in the boardroom and really at executive discussions. Also what we're seeing are customers as well as employees at the bank. They're now expecting executives to prioritize cybersecurity and have the proper risk management strategies in place to safeguard their data. And with community banks being extremely reputational sensitive, it's imperative that executives as well as the board really understand the gravity and their role in security and safeguarding the bank. Really, if we look at the entire kind of cybersecurity or cyber incident landscape, it's only going to get worse over time, right? And I think we can all attest to this and what we've seen in the news. And I think it's really important to share these types of statistics, with your board, with the executive team, and really help put things in perspective. If you think about it, what would the impact be to your bank if you were hit with a $650,000 or greater ransomware attack? What detriment would that be? Probably pretty significant, right? Does your bank have an AI policy in place? Has it even, have you even had that conversation there at the bank? Especially where AI is today and the integration of AI into so many of our current business processes, whether we know it or not, AI can be a wonderful tool, but then opens up the door to many risks and other regulatory concerns. And what's interesting about these statistics, the majority of attacks are now human targeted through phishing. So, 90%, the number you see there, 90%, it's an enormous portion. And just like the shift in security accountability, we've seen a drastic shift in cyber incidents from targeting traditional technology to now business and human process.
All right. And thank you, Anthony, for kind of setting the stage.
Sure.
Thanks, everybody, again for joining. I'm Jeremy Baumruck. I guess Anthony introduced me earlier, Director of Professional Services and Compliance here at Xamin. And as Anthony mentioned, there has been this shift in what makes up an institution's risk profile. It no longer is just technology, but incorporates human and business risk as well. And some of those driving factors in this shift is interconnected systems. Data that resides in one system can be accessed from another. Data reliance. Data is our most critical asset. Legal and regulatory compliance. Protecting PII is not only a function of the IT department, and then the impact on operations. So as we look at what's at stake when it comes to security incidents, again, I think we all know and understand what's at stake. But really the important piece to mention here is, again, board and leadership oversight is no longer just a leading practice, it's a necessity. Governments and regulators are challenging board members and executives to demonstrate diligence in information security, and regulators expect PII to be protected. I just wanted to read this stat. I think it's relevant as we talk about, obviously, board oversight and all those headlines that Anthony just walked through with you. Is 43% of senior bank executives don't believe their bank is adequately equipped to protect customer data, privacy, and assets in the event of a cyber attack. Likely this gap stems from several challenges: the intricate nature of cybersecurity, the swift evolution of cyber threats, and a widespread lack of specialized expertise among board members. And just for some comparison stakes, among major U.S. corporations, 51% of Fortune 100 companies have at least one board member with a background in information security. But this figure drops to only 17% for S&P 500 companies and further declines to 9% for companies listed in the Russell 3000 index. Really, this just highlights there's a significant variation in cybersecurity expertise at the board level across different sized businesses in all different industries. And of the largest companies, only 50% have a board member with this expertise, which is likely even much lower in the community banking space. So naturally, many of you are likely wondering, what should I be asking as an executive or board member to understand cybersecurity as it pertains to my role? These questions up here on the sliders, certainly very common. We hear our colleagues and clients in the industry ask. And while these are certainly valid questions, the answers may not necessarily be tangible or measurable. And it's really important to steer leadership away from the wrong questions, which really limit the scope of cybersecurity discussions to superficial levels. Instead, we want to focus on measures that can enhance executive and board's efficiency and ensure a seamless information flow. So through our initiatives focused on board outreach and education, and through some research, we've identified 3 prevalent questions frequently raised by both executive and management teams. Now, these questions, one is strategic, one is tactical, and one is operational. So this first question, what are the new cybersecurity threats and risks, and how do they affect our institution? This would be strategic and aiming to obtain a current and comprehensive overview of the cyber threat landscape that's easily grasped by executive leadership. So really understanding the cybersecurity implications of key business decisions. Question 2, is our institution's cybersecurity program ready to meet the challenges of today's and tomorrow's cyber threat landscape? This is more tactical and looking at whether the bank is doing enough due diligence to mitigate risks depending on its risk profile. It's also important to know how the operations and management team is staying abreast of current cybersecurity threats and how those are incorporated into the current and future risk management program. And question 3, what key risk indicators should I be reviewing at the executive management and board levels to perform effective information risk management? And this would be an operational question, clarifying, prioritizing, and ultimately translating what it really means from a risk posture perspective. So from an information security KRI perspective, some example KRIs that we typically see would be a number of cyber incidents with business impact. That's typically going to be related to whether or not the incident response plan was enacted. High risk past due patches, employee email phishing test success percentage, or IT employee turnover percentage. So next, we're going to dive into this executive governance model and really providing a way to facilitate communication effectively across executives and the operations. Again, effective communication with the board about cybersecurity necessitates this strategic shift in the conversation away from those granular technical details and towards the broader implications for the company's strategic goals. This model provides a structured way to look at information security governance with, again, a focus on communication and cultivating that risk-based culture. So as we dive into each one of these 6 areas, this next 6 slides will look similar. Left-hand side will be the executive and board responsibilities and engagement. Right-hand side is management or operational responsibility. And then the important piece is that green communication arrow on the bottom, ensuring this seamless communication flow. So under leadership and governance, really the objective here is ensuring management is demonstrating due diligence, ownership, and effective management of risk. So this is defining accountability, defining responsibilities, and ensuring that information is shared in some sort of structured format. So when we think about leadership and governance, or specifically governance when it comes to IT in the banking industry, we're usually talking about IT steering committee meetings, board reporting, and then information security reporting, which we'll dive into a little bit more when we talk about compliance. The next domain is human or personnel factors. And as many of us know, and as was highlighted by that statistic that Anthony talked about earlier when it comes to phishing, unfortunately, the human component is critical to information security because they are typically the weakest link in an institution's risk profile. In order to move that human component from a weakness to a strength requires integration of that security culture from the top down. And that will help ensure that the right people and knowledge are prevalent throughout the bank and everybody understands their role in cybersecurity. When we talk about information risk management, this is obviously the core of information security. And the approach is to achieve thorough and effective risk management of information throughout the institution. So when we talk about risk management approach here, that's typically going to be defined in your information security policy or in a separate risk management program. And really the important responsibility on the management side is the risk assessment piece. So we know the information risk assessment, the GLBA risk assessment, those types of things really become the foundation for the information security program, and then communicating those to the board to ensure that they have the right information to make strategic decisions around the gaps that are identified through that risk assessment process. We know that risk assessment process can be cumbersome, so whether that's handled internally or with the help of third parties, again, important to get those as accurate and correct as possible, because that really becomes that foundational component for information risk management. Business continuity and incident response. We're all, I'm sure, very familiar with this area, as we've been dealing with it in the compliance world for a long time, specifically business continuity testing and disaster recovery testing. In recent years, there's been a heightened awareness around incident response management and tabletop exercises, which leads us to the bullet point. The last bullet point there on the left are under executive and board engagement. We don't typically see board members participating in tabletop exercises. However, it is usually pretty common for a C-suite executive to participate, and that ultimately will come down to what's defined in your incident response plan. Typically, there's going to be a C-level role assigned to the communication function within your incident response plan. So ultimately, whoever is defined in that incident response plan in the team should be participating in these annual tabletop exercises. Having somebody on the executive team join not only helps get a different lens and different view of the controls and processes in place as you walk through that exercise, but also ensures that there's somebody sitting on the executive and board side that can help facilitate that communication from the incident response and business continuity information to ensure a seamless understanding and constant communication flow. Operations and technology. So we're focusing on the level of control measures implemented to address the identified risks and then reduce the impact of a compromise. I really just wanted to touch on the first two bullet points here under executive and board, understanding current maturity of the control structure and reviewing relevancy of the selected control framework. Here, we're not necessarily talking about specific compliance or banking specific frameworks. These would be usually industry agnostic or at least technology agnostic frameworks that are defined in your information security policy or your infrastructure hardening policy to ensure that when a new asset is deployed in your environment, whether it's a laptop, workstation, network device, etc., is deployed using a standardized procedure to ensure that the same security settings are deployed each and every time. So two of the most common control frameworks that we typically see defined in policy would be the NIST CSF or cybersecurity framework, which actually just released their updated 2.0 framework a few weeks ago, and the CIS control set. So those, again, would be more commonly defined in information security or infrastructure hardening. And it's the operation and management responsibility to ensure that when those assets are deployed, they're deployed to that selected framework and the proper security controls are put in place before that asset is live in production. And last but not least, compliance, which I know we all love dealing with here in the banking industry, ultimately the core of what we do. And here is where it's important to understand the applicable compliance regulations as it relates to banking and the industry. So this is where obviously things like the FFIE CAT or cybersecurity assessment, the GLBA regulations or the information security, things that are specific to the industry here, it's important to understand because those types of assessments and the findings and recommendations may all look a little different, but ultimately need to be presented in a way that is digestible to the board so they can make the proper risk decisions and remediate gaps that come from these different areas. Obviously, as well as we talked about, and the whole goal here is to just reiterate the fact that leadership and executive teams are being held accountable, is ensuring that the information is reported properly. And actually, that's where I want to touch on last here on the compliance section, which is review information security board reports. When I was talking about the governance and leadership area earlier, we talked about setting up, standard committees and reporting to the board. Many times there's a subset of the information shared in that IT steering committee meeting that's shared to the board in a regular cadence. But depending on the size of your institution or the locations of your institutions, you likely are required to do some sort of information security board reporting on an annual basis. I know the OCC and some of the other institutions we've worked with has a pretty standardized format they like to see presented specifically around information security. So that would be, usually in January, February, there's an annual meeting where this board report is presented, and it's taking a look at the previous calendar year. And this is going to address everything that we kind of touched on here. So defining your KRIs, showing whether or not they fell out of tolerance, reviewing the incident response plan, documenting the results of the tabletop exercises, business continuity and disaster recovery plans. Did you ever have to enact any of those plans? The results of audits and penetration testing. So again, it's a very holistic view, incorporating all that information simplified to be able to be shared with the board. Again, that's typically done on an annual basis. Now, of course, though, as we mentioned, there's much more frequent touch points usually coming out of those IT steering committees. So to wrap up my portion before I turn it back over to Anthony, I just wanted to reiterate that, again, the goal of this presentation is really to provide a model for effective communication. As you know, there is no silver bullet for cybersecurity protection, but just throwing money into services or resources without understanding how that impacts the strategic risk is not going to provide value. So speaking the language of the board can help bridge the gap between tactical cybersecurity measures and what that means strategically to the bank's risk profile. Performing a business impact analysis, which translates technical cybersecurity risks into business terms that resonate with board members, such as financial impact, regulatory impact, and reputational damage, can be an important tool in fostering this communication flow. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Anthony.
Excellent. Absolutely. There's definitely no silver bullet in cybersecurity, as we know. Definitely a layered approach and strategic approach to doing everything we can do to reduce risk. So we just wanted to, yeah, for sure. We wanted to highlight very relevant one of our clients here that has been so gracious to let us use them as a case study, National Iron Bank in Connecticut. And we engaged with National Iron Bank a little over 2 years ago. And the bank at the time, and they still do, they have an excellent managed services partner, and that managed services partner takes care of all the day-to-day managing of the network and kind of IT function at the bank. But they were really struggling, to kind of help bridge the gap between IT and executive oversight, really as well to also maintain appropriate IT risk assessments and keep up with policy updates. So the first step in working with the bank was really to engage in a very comprehensive IT risk review and assessment process. And through that, we were able to better understand the environment. We looked at the gaps in security, the gaps in policy and procedure, and really reviewed the existing risk assessment process and kind of found areas of enhancement there. So we were able to take a lot of the data from our assessment and build out this custom advisory program for the bank. So we participate as a virtual, kind of in that virtual CIO role, as well as assist with policy updates, risk assessments, vulnerability management, and really at the end of the day, per my previous conversation, really assist the bank in aligning their business goals with technology and future planning. So it's been a great relationship with the bank, and I might put them on the spot for a second. We didn't rehearse this, but Jeremy, since you and your team are so very close to this client and working with them on a day-to-day basis, maybe given our theme of the presentation today, kind of how have we helped the bank manage board and executive accountability, and what are some of the future projects that we're going to be helping them with?
Yeah, certainly. It obviously is relevant because one of their biggest challenges was obviously not even just getting a grasp of knowledge of how to complete these information risk assessments. We talked a little bit about that today. Obviously, the GLBA piece is a big component to that, but we know there's a ton of subset of risk assessments like wire transfers, online banking, et cetera. There's a lot of things to handle just from a risk assessment standpoint. And then there was really no board reporting at the time. When we were coming in, that was a big struggle. They were using some, minute notes coming from their risk committee, but there was no formalized structure. So, we meet with them on a quarterly basis at minimum, but certainly usually more monthly. And our QBR reports and our QBR meetings really become that communication to the board. So we've helped them streamline the information, centralize that into a more refined board report, which they've found very helpful and useful to address those concerns. Coming up here, we've kind of taken more ownership over the risk assessment component, and we've started to work more closely with the board. So coming through this year, we're really enhancing all the administrative controls, policies and procedures, et cetera, to make sure they align with all the new risk assessment strategies that we're working with, and then ensuring that that information is presented in the proper way to the board through what I was talking about earlier, kind of more standardized board report format. The OCC is one that we work with quite frequently that has a very defined way they like us to present this information. And so we've helped develop these report formats to help share that information on a regular cadence.
Excellent. Fantastic. And one last point or question for you. AI has come up a lot, and, per the statistics, it's obviously here to stay and growing every single day. What are you seeing with our banks and with other banks that we're speaking with in regards to AI and policies that need to be in place there?
Yeah, it's a great one because it's coming up, as we all know, and it's being thrown in our face, whether or not you like it. Yeah, we use Windows today, and we know autopilot is integrated into Windows, and many of us have probably seen it pop up. It's being integrated into Bing Chat. Everything we do has AI ever since that booming of OpenAI release with ChatGPT. So obviously, there's been a big concern to either just completely eliminate the use of it or try to get understanding and control over at least the initial use cases. So really our first work that we've been doing with institutions around AI has been the administrative control side. Let's start to get some acceptable use policies and guidelines in place of what we want as a bank to allow our staff to do. And then kind of some best practice implementations from a high level. Now, when it is specific to generative AI, since that's been really the biggest shift, whether or not we know it or not, AI has been used in many of our services, especially in technology, for many years. Think of spam filtering. That's been using AI technology for years. But it's really this change in the generative AI that has prompted this massive shift in the last year. And so, again, just trying to get ahead of that and understand, okay, from a high level, if we were to deploy generative AI in our bank, or at least allow the use of what's out there, here are some general guidelines from a holistic view, and then here's acceptable use guidelines from a more staff employee oriented standpoint. And naturally, we'll continue to build on that as the regulations and regulators kind of get caught up. But the goal, obviously, from our perspective, is just to get ahead of that. We know it's going to start with policy and administrative controls, eventually, blocking certain things on the technology side through Microsoft, et cetera. But again, that's our tack right now, is really starting from the administrative side, getting some things out there, ensuring everybody's following the same set of guidelines. And then we can refine those as things become more clear from the compliance standpoint in coming years.
Excellent. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's only a matter of time before the becomes the standard set of questions on your exams and audits. So,
oh yeah.
Very good. Very good. Well, we appreciate you guys sticking around here with us for 30 minutes and taking time out of your day. We wanted to be short, sweet, and informative for you here today. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. As I mentioned, we'll be sending out a copy of the slides in a follow-up email. So keep an eye out from that. It will be coming directly from me. If you have any other questions, you can email us or feel free to type them in the chat. And if there's anything we can help with, we are here. So thank you for attending, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.